Not war, not an economic crisis, but in the next few years, the lives of millions of Filipinos will change in ways that are very hard to notice at first. No warnings, no explosive moment, just things that seem small. A shorter commute, an area that suddenly feels more crowded, a decision to move earlier than planned. From 2026 to 2030, many massive infrastructure projects will gradually begin operations. They don't just build roads, put up bridges, or open airports. They quietly change the rhythm of daily life, the cost of living, and even who can keep up with that pace of change. What matters is this: these big shifts rarely begin with a big decision. They usually begin quietly, with one specific project. And this story starts with that very first project. Number 10. Iloilo, Capiz, Aklan Expressway. Not everyone recognizes the moment life starts to change. For many people on Panay Island, it came in a very simple form. Buses no longer had to leave the terminal before sunrise. Delivery papers no longer needed an extra 2-hour buffer like before. A new road, which sounds harmless, begins to slip into daily routines in exactly that way. For many years, the trip connecting Iloilo, Capiz, and Aklan was a familiar challenge. 6 to 7 hours on the road, passing through narrow and crowded sections, was enough to discourage anyone thinking of expanding business farther out. So a lot of opportunities were put on hold, simply because the road took too long. From 2024, the first construction sites for the Iloilo-Capiz-Aklan Expressway started appearing. The sound of machines, temporary barriers, lanes squeezed narrower. When the main sections are expected to be completed between 2027 and 2029, that journey will shrink to around 3 to 4 hours. For cargo drivers, that means a workday that feels less punishing. For small businesses, fuel costs and time start getting recalculated. But when distance gets shorter, everything else starts moving too. Pieces of land along the route begin getting inquiries from buyers. Warehouse rents creep up year after year. Small stores, once used to serving a stable community, start facing bigger, faster competitors coming in from somewhere else. This expressway, stretching over 200 kilometers, doesn't just connect 3 provinces. It connects new choices, and it also exposes old limits. Some people will know how to seize the opportunity. Others will start to feel themselves slowing down. When distance suddenly becomes too short, not everyone has enough time to adjust to what's coming fast ahead. When distance is no longer the issue, people begin paying attention to something else. Every minute of commuting, every minute of waiting, and every minute lost, the kind no one used to count before. Number 9. Cebu Bus Rapid Transit. Cebu Bus Rapid Transit. In Cebu, there are mornings when just looking at the clock is enough to feel tense. The alarm has barely stopped, but the worry has already begun. Leave the house just a few minutes late, and the whole day's class schedule can shift. For many students living around Talamban, arriving on time isn't just discipline, it's the only way to keep life from falling apart. For years, getting around Cebu has always been tied to waiting. Crowded jeepneys, long traffic, a short distance that can still take more than an hour. Some mornings, you just stand still in the flow of vehicles, watching time slip away bit by bit. That exhaustion repeats until it feels normal, even though no one truly wants it to become normal. When Cebu Bus Rapid Transit shows up in city announcements, many people hear it, but don't dare to hope too much. The project has been talked about for a long time, but by 2026, the main BRT routes are expected to begin operating. The line is around 13 kilometers long, with a dedicated lane, fixed stations, and a more stable schedule than older transport options. The difference isn't on the blueprint or in the plan, it's in mornings that feel less rushed. On attendance lists quickly photographed on a phone, the name Mark L., 21 years old, starts appearing more consistently than before. The familiar trip gets shortened by nearly 40 to 45 minutes each day. That time is enough to eat breakfast properly, enough to stop running while fearing you'll be late. But when commuting becomes easier, other changes show up with it. Boarding houses near BRT stations gradually fill up. Room rents rise every term. Some of Mark's friends start looking for places farther away to keep their old costs, even if it means a longer trip. Cebu Bus Rapid Transit doesn't just give time back to a single trip. It forces the whole city to rearrange its rhythm. And in that process, each person has to answer a very practical question. When time becomes more valuable, who actually has the means to hold on to it for the long run? Number 8. Manila Bay, Pasig River, Laguna Lake Water Transport. There are mornings in Metro Manila when the rarest thing is not a seat, but silence. Car horns, engine noise, and tightly packed crowds blend into a familiar background sound, so familiar that many people no longer notice when the exhaustion actually began. That's why, when a boat pulls away from the dock on the Pasig River, the first feeling isn't faster, but easier to breathe. On the deck, an employee ID sways gently with the movement of the water, its corner worn thin from brushing against a bag every day. The small text reads, "Liza," just below a portrait photo. She doesn't say much, just adjusts the strap, then checks her phone for her shift time. The habit is the same, only the journey has quietly changed. No traffic jams, no sudden braking, no standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers on a short route that somehow feels endless. For many years, water transport in Manila was almost forgotten. The Pasig River was seen as a barrier, not a pathway. But since 2023, pilot routes connecting Manila Bay, the Pasig River, and Laguna Lake have begun operating again. By the period from 2026 to 2028, as transfer terminals and main routes become more complete, this option could turn into a real part of daily commuting, not just an experience for the curious. Travel time may not win outright against every road route, but stability wins in another way. It gives back a sense of control. Liza doesn't need to guess how bad traffic will be today, doesn't need to text an apology for being late before the shift even starts. But quiet routes rarely stay quiet for long. As more people turn to them, the docks grow busier. Riverfront areas are looked at again. Rental prices begin to inch up, and a quiet question starts to surface. If a river suddenly becomes a main road, who will be able to afford staying beside that water the longest? Number 7. Metro Cebu Expressway. A city doesn't always change through things people can immediately see. In Cebu, change begins with very small signs, updated planning maps, thicker stacks of building permit applications on office desks, and land for sale signs appearing on roads few people used to notice. The city hasn't opened roads noisily, but its boundaries are quietly shifting. The Metro Cebu Expressway is one such project. Stretching roughly 74 kilometers, it has been developed in phases since 2022 and is expected to be largely completed before 2030. It doesn't cut straight through the center, but loops around it, connecting areas once considered distant and hard to reach. That's exactly why the change arrives slowly, but spreads widely. In an older, residential area, a notice posted at the barangay gate announces new right-of-way measurements. The numbers on paper don't say much, but they're enough to make some families start thinking about renovating their homes or considering an earlier move than planned. When roads are redrawn, the value of location is redrawn as well. As different sections take shape, once quiet plots of land start getting mentioned more often. Survey vehicles pass by more frequently. Words like connectivity, potential, and new growth area begin appearing in everyday conversations. People don't see traffic easing overnight, but they do see living costs slowly creeping up. The Metro Cebu Expressway doesn't make Cebu louder overnight. It makes the city bigger, in a different direction. And the paradox is this: when movement becomes faster, many people realize the city feels farther away than before, not because of distance, but because they have to run faster just to keep up with where they live. Number 6. Bataan, Cavite Interlink Bridge. Late in the afternoon, the delivery schedule for the next day gets adjusted once again. A few routes are crossed out, not because of a lack of orders, but because detours through Metro Manila always carry too much risk. Just one extra hour stuck in traffic can immediately push fuel and labor costs higher. For small logistics businesses in Cavite, every route change is a tense calculation. For many years, doing business in this area depended not only on prices or customers, but on the road itself. Some trucks had to depart earlier than planned, not to deliver faster, but simply to avoid traffic. The routine became so familiar that just by looking at the departure time, people could already tell whether the day would work out or not. The Bataan-Cavite Interlink Bridge emerges in that context. Construction began in 2023. The bridge spans nearly 32 kilometers across Manila Bay, with a target completion around 2027 to 2028. Once operational, this direct connection will replace many overloaded detour routes, making travel between Bataan and Cavite shorter and more predictable. In cost spreadsheets, the impact shows up clearly. Fuel use becomes easier to control. One truck can make an extra trip in a day. Calls asking to delay deliveries become less frequent. For companies able to expand their fleets and warehouses, that advantage multiplies quickly. But at the same time, pressure becomes more visible. When movement gets easier, large companies are no longer limited by territory. They expand their reach, moving into areas that used to be the home ground of smaller players. Competition shifts away from price toward endurance and scale. Not everyone has enough capital to keep up with this new rhythm. The Bataan-Cavite Interlink Bridge doesn't just connect two shores. It connects markets that were once separate. And when those markets touch, the rules are forced to change. Some move faster and win. But others begin to realize that in a race where the road itself has been widened, standing still is no longer a safe option. Number 5. Davao Samal Bridge. On Samal Island, waiting used to be a familiar part of life. Waiting for the ferry to dock. Waiting for guests to arrive. Waiting for the sea to calm after days of strong winds. In front of a small house near the shore, a wooden board showing check-in hours is set up early each morning. If the ferry is late, every plan for the day is delayed with it, from lunch to the room cleaning schedule. For many years, the distance between Samal and Davao was not measured in kilometers, but in waiting time. Just a few kilometers of sea, yet completely dependent on ferry schedules and weather. For island residents, that was normal. But for those living off tourism, every wait meant income put on hold, with no certainty of when it would arrive. When construction of the Davao-Samal Bridge began in 2022, the atmosphere on the island started to shift. The bridge, about 4 kilometers long and expected to be completed in 2027, promises a 24-hour connection between the two shores. No more relying on ferries. No more long lines under the sun. It all sounds like a very clear, very attractive promise. In the booking notebook placed on a wooden table, some lines are written, then crossed out. Weekends that used to stay empty are now almost fully booked. The homeowner lingers longer on that page, weighing whether to accept more guests or not. The name Aileen appears afterward, added next to a familiar phone number, like a habit repeated for many years. More stable income. Plans to renovate a few rooms are written down, crossed out, then written again. But at the same time, Samal is changing faster. More visitors arrive, land prices rise, daily living costs inch upward, quiet evenings become rarer. Not everyone is sure they want the island to change in that way. The bridge soon to link Samal to the mainland doesn't only bring opportunity, it brings a very real question. When travel is no longer a barrier, what will be strong enough to keep an island true to the very reason people fell in love with it in the first place? Number 4. Panay Guimaras, Negros Bridge Chain. In Western Visayas, moving from one island to another was never as simple as it looked on a map. A boat might run this morning, but the afternoon trip could be cancelled due to strong winds. Goods reached the market later than planned. Travelers grew used to waking up early just to wait for an announcement of whether a boat would run or not. Distance between islands wasn't measured in kilometers, but in ferry schedules and weather. The Panay Guimaras Negros bridge chain took shape in that context. The bridges, each stretching tens of kilometers, have been developed in phases since the early 2020s, with the goal of completing most sections before 2030. Once finished, the major islands in the region will be directly connected by road, replacing the near-total dependence on ferries. The first change isn't tourism, but the movement of goods. Trucks can drive straight from Negros to Panay. Agricultural products no longer have to wait for enough shipments to be gathered. Raw materials from Guimaras reach their destinations faster and more consistently. Roads once used only to local traffic begin welcoming long-haul deliveries. But when islands are linked, the natural separation that once created unique advantages starts to fade. Markets that used to operate independently begin to collide. Stronger businesses expand faster. Places that once lived slowly, protected by geographic distance, are forced to adapt to a new competitive rhythm. Land prices near connection points rise. Infrastructure pressure appears in areas never used to heavy traffic. The Panay Guimaras Negros bridge chain doesn't just make travel easier. It rearranges the role of each island within a shared system. Some become transfer hubs. Others are passed through more than stayed in. When physical distance disappears, the key question is no longer how long the trip takes, but what position each place can hold when every road is finally connected. Number 3. New and expanded airport projects in Metro Manila. In Metro Manila, there are mornings when highways are almost at a standstill, yet overhead, planes still take off on time. Electronic boards inside terminals keep flashing. City names appearing and disappearing. On one side are passengers who've already checked in, pulling their suitcases and moving fast. On the other are long lines still waiting their turn, eyes fixed on delayed flight notices. That imbalance is why new airport projects have been placed at the center of infrastructure plans. Bulacan International Airport, Sangley Point Airport, and other expansion projects began construction in the early 2020s with the goal of partial operations between 2026 and 2028. Not only to ease the load on NAIA, but to change how Filipinos connect with the world. The first changes don't show up on runways, but in movement rhythms, more direct flights, shorter connection times. For industries that depend on precise timing, logistics, tourism, overseas work, travel becomes less risky. Time is no longer gambled as heavily on familiar congestion. But airports don't just open air routes. They also draw very clear lines. Areas within new connectivity zones are quickly rezoned. Land prices rise. Services move in. Opportunities concentrate where people can go far faster. Meanwhile, places left off the new aviation map remain outside that flow, even though the physical distance hasn't changed. New airports bring the world closer for some people, but at the same time, they raise a very real question. In a transport system that keeps accelerating, who gets to take off first and who is left waiting on the ground? Number 2. North-South Commuter Railway. Every morning, while it's still not fully light, Daniel R. leaves his home in Bulacan. Some days, he goes while his child is still asleep, breakfast prepared only for the one staying behind. Not because he wants to leave early, but because if he leaves later, the entire day that follows turns into a long stretch of exhaustion. For many years, choosing to live far from Metro Manila was a clear trade-off for Daniel. A bigger house, lower costs, more breathing space for the family. But in return came long journeys. Some days took 3 to 4 hours just for commuting. Time with his children didn't disappear all at once. It was slowly worn away through late evenings and meals that never quite felt complete. The North-South Commuter Railway arrives just as that choice begins to feel too heavy. The rail project spans more than 160 kilometers. Construction started in the late 2010s, with major sections expected to operate between 2026 and 2028. Once completed, it will directly connect northern and southern provinces to Metro Manila through a more stable rail system, less dependent on traffic congestion. The first changes arrive quietly. Daniel no longer has to leave home too early. Coming back no longer feels too late. Evenings feel more complete. Not because there is less work, but because the distance between home and work finally stops taking so much life away. But convenience brings new pressure. Areas near stations quickly become more crowded. Home prices and rents rise. Some families are forced to reconsider, move closer to save time, or keep traveling farther to hold on to their old costs. The North-South Commuter Railway doesn't just shorten distances, it forces people like Daniel to reprice their time. And when moving becomes easier, the question is no longer whether the trip is possible, but whether life has enough room to enjoy the time that has just been given back. Number 1. National Digital Infrastructure of the Philippines. In a small coastal town in the south, mornings begin slowly. Small shops open later than office hours. On the counter, a phone vibrates softly with a new order. As long as the signal is stable, work can begin without leaving home. For people living here, the world no longer feels far away, as long as the connection doesn't drop. Not far from there, in an older residential area, a neighborhood store keeps its familiar rhythm. A handwritten credit notebook sits beside the cash register. Cash is neatly arranged in the drawer. When customers ask about electronic payment, the answer is often a gentle shake of the head, not out of resistance, but because the old way still feels safe enough to keep living by. The Philippines' national digital infrastructure is expanding rapidly from 2026 to 2030. Fiber optic cables, data centers, and high-speed mobile networks are reaching deeper into the provinces. For people working online, selling digitally, or providing remote services, location is no longer an absolute limit. Income can come from very far away. But this connection doesn't spread at the same pace for everyone. Some adapt quickly and catch on early. Others move more slowly, not because they're incapable, but because they've never needed to change this fast before. The new divide is no longer measured in kilometers, but in readiness to step into a different way of living. In the order list, the name Miguel appears steadily every day. Across the street, Mrs. Elena still writes down every debt by hand, just as she has for years. Both live in the same country, in the middle of a transition. Digital infrastructure doesn't just change how the Philippines connects to the world. It asks a very personal question of each individual. When everything can be connected, what decides who moves forward with the change, and who chooses to stop, to hold on to the rhythm of life they know best? From roads, bridges, and rail lines to invisible digital systems, infrastructure projects between 2026 and 2030 are not only changing how the Philippines connects, but also how people live, work, and choose their future. Some move faster, some slow down, and some are forced to recalculate everything from the beginning. If you recognize parts of your own life in these stories, leave a comment to share your perspective. Give the video a like if it offered you a new way of seeing things, and subscribe to the channel to keep following stories that help make sense of the Philippines and the choices people face every day.